Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. I am Kim Walgren, the longtime editor of Wood Floor Business Magazine, and today we're going to take a deep dive into subfloor prep with our experts from LOBA Wakol. Before I turn it over to them and introduce them though, two quick things. One is that if you have any questions during the presentation, you can type them into the questions panel on the right-hand side of the screen that you see in your GoToWebinar panels. And then the second one is that you will be getting an email with a video of this presentation early next week. So if you want to review it or you would like to share it with any colleagues or coworkers, that will be coming to your inbox. So with that said, I will turn it over to Eric Underwood. Eric is a WAKOL applications specialist. And later in our presentation, we might be having Don Jewell, the head of technical for LOBA Wakol, join us. He's on the road. So if he finds a quiet spot with Wi-Fi, we might be joined by Don as well. But for now, I'll turn it over to Eric.
Appreciate it, Kim. Yeah, so I'm Eric Underwood. I'm been with LOBA Wakol now for 2 years in the technical department. A little bit of background on myself. I first got into the business back in 2001. Started out doing carpet, sheet vinyl, all types of resilient floor coverings, and did a lot of hardwood floor installs as well. Started here October of 21, so just celebrated my 2-year anniversary here at LOBA Wakol. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and get straight into the PowerPoint presentation on the products that we're going to be showing. All right, so how to properly prepare a concrete substrate to install hardwood floors. A lot of frequently asked questions. Is moisture a concern, and how do I test for moisture? Well, first of all, anytime you're dealing with concrete, moisture is always going to be a concern. How do I address cracks, and what do I need to fill them with? And how do I get a substrate smooth and flat, and why do I need it smooth and flat? So we're going to go ahead and get into some of the products. Well, first, before we do that, we're going to start out with like some different types of moisture testing. There's some different types. This is 3 common moisture tests that you see today. Most people are familiar with the calcium chloride test on the far left. It basically measures the amount of vapor that's emitting out of the concrete slab at the present time. And then you have the situ probes, which basically tells you the relative humidity in the concrete, and it also will tell you like the slab temperature. And then you have the electronic impedance meter, which basically is good for identifying hot spots in the concrete. And a lot of people ask, well, which one should I use? Well, I would say use them all, because they all tell different bits of information. So do you want to know how much relative humidity is in the slab, or do you need to know how many pounds of moisture it's emitting at the present time? So I like to use the electronic impedance meter to locate areas that are reading high. Then that'll basically tell me where I need to place these other 2 tests. So they're all very effective, and they tell you different bits of information. So they're all very effective. The ASTM F3191, that is a water droplet test. It's about the most simple test you can do just to check the porosity of a concrete slab. As you can see, the water droplet next to that penny, all you have to do is just put that water droplet onto the concrete, and then within 60 seconds or less, that water droplet should fully absorb into that concrete. And if you still have a puddle, a little droplet there, even in part after 1 minute, then you know that you have a non-absorbent concrete slab. So with any like moisture mitigation system, not just ours, but other manufacturers, 9 times out of 10, you're going to see that stipulation in their guidelines and their technical data sheets. So you basically have to remove any contaminants and stuff like that off of the the concrete slab in order to use our mitigation system. So like I said, just 1 minute, it should fully absorb. You'll see the dark spot, and that gives you a sign that you have a absorbent substrate. If you still have a puddle of water right there, then you know that there's something on that concrete that's not allowing that water droplet to absorb. And it could be adhesive residue. It could be curing compounds. And people say, well, how do I know if there's a curing compound or a sealer on there? A lot of times you can take like a pocket knife or even a razor knife, and you can scratch at that surface. And generally, if it has a curing compound or some type of sealer on it, it'll be like a white chalky residue, like a powder that you scrape off. If it's a light gray, like the color of the concrete, typically there's nothing on there. But also, you know, how they finish the concrete, like if they power troweled it, or they had those big old ride-on machines where they have those big fan blades and they're sitting down on there and they're basically burnishing the concrete. They're basically closing it off. Typically, it looks real smooth, like almost like a mirror finish. If they do that, then that's I can about guarantee you that you have a non-absorbent concrete slab. So if you're going to do like a moisture mitigation on there, then you're going to have to do some type of floor prep to open that up. So three common ways to properly prepare your concrete slab. You got the shot blaster, as you can see in the far left. You know, it basically shoots little BBs into the concrete, and it basically blasts off everything that's in its way. It comes up, the BBs comes up. The BBs are actually, they're real small, like little pieces of lead, and they'll be like recycled back into the canister, and then the dust will go into the vacuum dust collector system. So that's one way. It's very fast. I know some guys that do concrete prep every day for a living, they have some of these big old shot blasters, and they can shot blast 10,000 square foot in a day. So you can get a lot done with one of those. If you're doing like a lot of big commercial work, then obviously it's worth having something like that. You can use a grinder, as you see illustrated right there in the middle. That's just like a buffer style grinder. They make different manufacturers makes those. And then you can get like planetary grinders as well. Some that run off 220, some that run off even propane. But it's basically grinding the concrete, so you can use those as well to mechanically prepare your substrate. In the far right, that's like a planing tool or a milling tool. That's a really aggressive way of removing contaminants and opening up the slab. If you was leveling or doing some moisture mitigation in like a old shop that they used to change oil in or something like that, and they've spilled a lot of motor oil over the years, and that oil has penetrated deep into the concrete, then yes, it might be necessary to go with something like that. But 9 times out of 10, either the shot blaster or the grinder is going to be more than enough to get your slab in the condition to use a moisture mitigation system. So the PS205, that is our solution for filling cracks in concrete. It's the WAKOL PS205. It's just a 2-part reactive resin. It's a 50-50. You just mix it 50-50. You don't have to mix the whole bottle. If you just got like a small crack or anything like that, you can actually use it in a separate bottle, mix it up, 1-to-1 by volume. It's designed for non-movable cracks. The PS205 also comes as a hollow spot repair kit for hardwood floors. If you had hollow spots, then we actually have a hollow spot repair kit that comes with the needle and the drill bits and stuff like that for fixing hollow spots. So why do we fill cracks in concrete? The main reason, and I say that jokingly because I've had people, they've done all the right steps. They've done the proper grinding on the slab. They got it clean, they got it dry. I mean, they got it absorbent and all that. And then they put the PU 280 down, and then they they install wood floor. And then 6 months later, a year later, however long, they end up calling and say, well, we got problems. And then they go out there to the job, they rip up boards, and sure enough, they didn't fill the crack with our PS205. So all cracks in the, like fractures in concrete, as long as it's a non-moving crack, they should be filled with the PS205 before you do any moisture mitigation. Obviously, if you have like a expansion joint or like a part of the slab that is designed to be able to move, like if you got big columns and stuff like that, and a lot of times you'll see the diamond shaped around that column, that is designed to move like that. So you're not supposed to fill those. Technically, you're not supposed to fill those. Those should be honored throughout the floor covering. Transition around them if you have to, but they're not supposed to be filled. Saw cuts is fine. Fill saw cuts and any cracks, non-moving cracks in your slab. So the WAKOL PU 280, that's probably one of our main sellers. People's been using it for years and years and years. It's a really popular product. Contractors seem to love this product in particular because it's such a good product. It's a very fast moisture mitigation system. It can be used in different applications, even if you're not wanting to use it as a moisture barrier. Even if you're just wanting to use it, you can use it in a single coat application as like a primer, like a adhesion promoter, solidifier, or consolidator. And some might ask, well, what do you mean by solidifier, consolidator? So like for instance, if you was wanting to use PU 280 over like a gypsum, to basically slow that moisture down, then you could do that, and it'll actually bind the dust, and it'll actually make the gypsum, that top layer of gypsum, stronger by applying the PU 280. And then the consolidating properties it has, like if you was to razor scrape old cutback adhesive residue or any type of residue that's on that floor, as long as it's scraped flat, that's why I have right there no ridges. It needs to be razor scraped flat. And then if you're just wanting to use it to consolidate that adhesive residue, then you can use it single coat over that adhesive residue to basically consolidate that or isolate that cutback adhesive residue. We talked a little bit about the different moisture tests. We talked about the ASTM 1869 or the calcium chloride. So, and also the RH probes. So in a single coat on concrete, you're going to get up to 90% relative humidity blockage, and then, or 12 pounds on the calcium chloride test. Two coats will go up to 98% relative humidity, or 18 pounds. The application tool, I like to use the 6080 roller. It's basically a 1/4 inch microfiber roller. I like to use that because it's a thin application. You're not supposed to put it on really heavy. A lot of people think, naturally you think, if I put on more PU 280, then I'm just going to get more moisture protection. And it reacts different when you put it on too heavy. Like I said, it's a polyurethane product. So polyurethane, naturally, it's going to foam and bubble. So if you do that, then you'll start seeing a bunch of little bubbles on the floor. So you're really, if you've already opened up the slab with a shot blaster or grinder, then you're going to want to use that PU 280 to basically squeeze that material down into the concrete. So that concrete is acting kind of like a sponge. Don't mop it on real heavy. You're just really wanting to push it down deep into the concrete. With the 6080 roller, you can get up to 400 square feet per gallon. It comes in a 1 gallon And it also comes in a 2.5 gallon jug. Obviously, you know, the 1 gallon will get 400 square feet. And if you're doing the 2.5 gallon, you can get 1,000 square feet out of one 2.5 gallon jug for one coat. You're going to have anywhere from 45 to 60-minute dry time. That's probably the fastest, you know, moisture mitigation system on the market. We give that range 45 to 60 minutes because it is a polyurethane product. So a polyurethane is a reactive product. So it reacts to the RH in the room and also the RH, you know, or the moisture that's in the slab. So if you have, you know, humid conditions, then it's just going to be a faster, it's going to cure faster. And obviously, depending on your location, if you're, you know, out in Colorado, like dry climates, you know, it might take longer because it's trying to find that moisture. And if there's not a lot of moisture to grab, then it's just going to, you know, it's going to slow down that drying process. Zero VOC on the WAKOL PU 280. It's not harmful in that sense. The PU 280 moisture barrier. We state that there's no moisture test required if that big if. You got to have, you know, there's certain stipulations to that. The concrete must be surface dry. Obviously, you can't have any like, you know, puddles on the concrete. It needs to be surface dry. It needs to be at least 28 days old. People ask, well, why does it got to be 28 days old? Well, you know, in 28 days, typically the concrete is going to crack within that first 28 days, and we want it to. If it's going to crack, we'd rather go ahead and crack. So that's why we state that 28 days, so that way it can go ahead and crack, and we can go ahead and address those cracks with the PS205. And surface temperature must be at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and must have an intact waterproofing membrane beneath the slab. I'm gonna say, well, how do I know if there's a membrane under the slab, like plastic? Well, you know, like new construction, a lot of times you can get up with the GC or the contractor, and you know, and they can verify that if it's got plastic beneath the slab. If you don't know, then the only other way is to do a core sample. And if you do a core sample, then you affect that membrane underneath the slab. So it's a two-edged sword. I say go ahead and moisture test. It's always good to have any documentation for every job site. You know, go ahead and keep a digital folder on every job. Just that way you have your proof. Because if anything ever did happen, then you can, you know, if you call the manufacturer, that's generally the first thing, you know, one of the first things they're going to ask you, well, what was your moisture test at the time of install? So if you don't have those, it's you know, it's hard to prove your case. As a moisture barrier, as we talked before, the ASTM F3191, the water droplet test, as long as you got that clean, dry, absorbent substrate and it passes that water droplet test, you do, as a moisture barrier, it's a 2-coat system. And then the single coat is considered a moisture retarder, or, you know, like it'll slow the rate of that moisture down. So like you never apply 2 coats on moisture sensitive substrates. Example, like plywood, you don't ever want to put 2 coats on plywood. And people say, well, why not? Well, because wood needs a little bit of moisture. If you stop moisture in plywood, then it'll just rot the plywood. So you want to slow that vapor emissions down by applying 1 thin coat on plywood substrates and also gypsum. You don't want to put 2 coats on gypsum, only 1 coat. So this is a I like this illustration here because it kind of gives you like an X-ray vision of like what the difference is between a 2-component epoxy system and our WAKOL PU 280 moisture barrier. I'm not knocking, not for 1 minute, a 2-component epoxy system. They are extremely effective. A lot of guys still like using the epoxy system, and they're great. They're effective when done right. But the reason I steer more to like a PU 280 type moisture barrier is, for one, it's a one component, and the dry time, or how soon I can install on it. Because a lot of epoxies you can't install in 45 minutes and 60 minutes. So the WAKOL PU 280, you can see the differences in between the two. You can see the one on the left, the two component, how the epoxy just seems to be laying on top in a layer. And then how you can see how the PU 280 is actually penetrated down into the concrete. It's going around those little rocks and stuff like that. And it actually becomes part of that concrete, and it strengthens that concrete, solidifies the actual top layer surface. It'll actually penetrate down. If you have a absorbent substrate, it'll actually penetrate down 3 to 4 millimeters. So very effective moisture mitigation system. So if you're going to be leveling, you've blocked the moisture in your slab with the PU 280. Obviously, we have other primers. We have primers for absorbent. We have primer, like a primer concentrate that you can use for different scenarios on non-absorbent and absorbent, depending on what ratio you use. But anytime you're going over WAKOL PU 280, we always recommend the D3045 special primer. It's a ready-to-use dispersion primer. It's for non-absorbent. So like going over PU 280, which when you apply PU 280, now you have a non-absorbent surface. So you're going to have to use the D3045. It'll go over the PU 280, even our MS 330 moisture barrier. You can go over ceramic tiles and terrazzo, and also plywood. The D3045 special primer, it's a gridded primer. When you open the bucket, it'll be pink in color. You just roll it on. Use the 6080 roller, the same one that we used on the that we talked about with the PU 280. Use that same roller, and you'll apply it. It'll be pink in color. Once it's dry, it'll turn like a clear color. And a lot of guys around here, like we like to refer to it like liquid sandpaper. Basically, once you roll that whole room with the 3045, once it dries, it becomes like a 100 grit sandpaper. So that PU 280, once you apply that, it's such a slick surface. You have to prime it with this, because if you just poured like leveling compound on top of that PU 280, it just would not bond. So we encourage to use the 3045 to get that enhanced adhesion properties, so that way that leveling compound can really bond to something strong. And 3045 is the one that performs the most. So that's the only one that we recommend as far as a primer going over the PU 280. Z631 is just one of our leveling compounds, and I'm wanting to highlight this one because it seems to be getting more and more popular. It's a very, very good leveling compound. It's very affordable. It's basically been our workhorse for years. People are getting more familiar with it. They like the way it flows. It gives just a perfectly good flat, smooth substrate to install a floor on. And people say, well, how, like one of my first slides, I said, well, how do I get why do I need a flat subfloor? Well, like NWFA, they have requirements, that it has to be within a certain flatness tolerance. If you try to glue a hardwood floor over, really rough surfaces, you're going to be dealing with hollow spots. It's just not going to be a good installation. When you level a floor, it gives you a perfectly flat surface, so you eliminate hollow spots, and it's just going to be a way better outcome on the job. The 631 is a Portland-based product. You can install as little as an 1/8 inch, and you can go all the way up to 2 inches in a single pour. Zero VOC product. You're going to get around 50 square foot at an 1/8. If that's an 1/8 inch is pretty low. That's pretty that's a small amount of leveling compound. So if you need to go a little bit deeper, go a 1/4 inch or even 3/8, just to eliminate some of those imperfections in the floor. Obviously, the deeper you go, the better it's going to self-level per se. I know that name sounds a little bit deceiving. Self-leveling feels like you can just pour it out and it's going to do it itself. You still have to work the product. Obviously, you still have to have the proper tools to use, the gauge rake, the smoothing trials, the mixing barrel, the drill, and all that. But you actually work the product. You set that gauge rake at however the thickness you want, whether it's a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, whatever. You lock that gauge rake down and you use that. And that's basically like your measuring device to set how high you're wanting to pour. Working time, we state 10 minutes. That's really depending on the climate. If you have cool, like if the air conditioning's running in the house or the place of business, then you can I've got up to 20 minutes working time. It's hard to put an approximate number on your working time because it's really contingent on the job site conditions. If you have extremely hot temperatures, if it's real hot in there, you better be working fast because your working time is going to get cut down. So if you have to chill your water, sometimes even the water coming out of the spigot, the faucet, it's warm coming out of there. I've actually been on job sites where we've had to buy a bunch of ice bags and dip ice bags into the mixed water before we even start mixing because the tap water that coming out of the faucet is just warm. And also your powders, you want to keep your powders out of the sunlight, keep them inside, keep them, just like you would acclimate your hardwood flooring, you want to acclimate your powders as well. It's walkable in 2 to 3 hours. 24 hours you can start installing on it. Anything deeper than 3/8 of an inch, you probably need to mat test, because this is not a self-drying self-leveler. It's not a self-drying, so you want to make sure all that mixed water has left the product before you start gluing down. So anything over 3/8, we highly encourage you just to do a mat test. Make sure you're not getting any moisture underneath that plastic. So some of the major components in not just our leveling compound, just in anyone's leveling compound, some of the major components obviously is cement and sand. Then your water, when you add that water, then that's basically that, what starts that chemical reaction. But cement and sand is your major components. Yeah, obviously there's a lot more other stuff that goes into an SLU. You got drying agents, you got different polymers blended in and stuff like that. But this is your major components in a leveling compound. I got these two pictures right here to just kind of illustrate what what'll happen, like if you don't use a primer. Say you was going over an absorbent, like say you was pouring leveling compound over leveling compound, like the leveling compound's already dried and you needed to do a lift, you needed to go up another 1/4 inch or so, and you don't use a primer. Well, you can see those pinholes in there, and that's what you'll get. Basically, the product's drying within itself too fast because there's air. There's air in the substrate itself. So when you pour on top of an absorbent slab, then that air in that substrate is trying to escape, and it's just coming right through that wet leveling compound, and then you end up with a bunch of little pinholes like that. And then the illustration to the right, that picture right there, that's inconsistent drying within the room. Like if you had fans on, or if somebody tried to put a fan on it and it's drying too fast from the top, you'll get that, what I like to call like elephant skin. That's just the best way I can describe it, because that's what it looks like. So that's important to use the right primers, depending on if you're moisture mitigating or not. You want to make sure you're using the right primers for absorbent or not absorbent. So you need to find out what you're dealing with by using that ASTM F3191 water droplet test. That can also determine which primer to use. In this picture right here, there's a lot going wrong with that. Basically, there's just too much water. Some people try to cheat and they'll try to add more water, try to get extended working time out of the product. If you do that, you're just pretty much ruining the product. I just took a call last week. It wasn't our product, but then I was just trying to get us to find, I was just trying to help the guy find a solution. But basically, they overwatered the leveling compound. And when you do that, that sand that we talked about, that sand that's in that leveling compound, it will fall out of suspension. It'll just create a very weak surface, and you pretty much failed at that installation. If you overwater and it looks like this right here, then that's a telltale sign that somebody overwatered that, or it was just extremely, extremely cold temperatures. So when that happens, you might as well just cut your losses, rip all that up and do it right. There's specifications on those bags. I always refer to manufacturer's instructions. For Z631, we state 5 quarts of water for each bag. So if you go trying to put 6 quarts of water, then you might end up looking, your job might end up looking like this right here. So I'm going to go ahead and at this time, go ahead and cue up the video.
Hello, I'm Eric Underwood, and I'm the WAKOL application specialist here at LOBA Wakol North America. Today I was wanting to talk to you about proper WAKOL systems, filling cracks in concrete, moisture mitigation, what primers to use, and leveling compounds. So it's very important to test the moisture content whether you're going over wood or concrete substrates. There are several different test methods to measure the vapor emissions in the concrete. You have the ASTM 1869, which is the calcium chloride test, and you also have the ASTM 2170, which is the situ probes. So it's very important to moisture test on every job and take documentation of each job site. There are several different methods to measure the moisture content in the concrete. First, or one of them, you have the ASTM 2170, which is the situ probes, where you actually hammer drill into the concrete 40% of the slab depth, and it gives you the RH that's inside the slab. Another method that is quite often used is the ASTM 1869, which is the calcium chloride test, which tells you how many pounds of moisture is containing at the present time of install. So when you're dealing with concrete, it's always important to properly fill cracks in concrete. Why do we fill cracks in concrete? Well, the main reason we fill cracks in concrete is because that is a potential path for moisture to pass through. If we don't fill the cracks in concrete, that moisture can pass through and it can affect the adhesive and your hardwood flooring. So our crack filler, PS205, is designed for non-moving cracks and saw cuts. If you have a moving crack, I do not suggest that you install over that. Call a concrete engineer and have that addressed. The WAKOL PS205 crack filler is our solution to repairing fractures in concrete before installation. The WAKOL PS205 crack filler is a 2-part silicate resin, Part A and Part B. The WAKOL PS205 consists of Part A and Part B. You mix equal parts of both materials. It doesn't matter, you can pour Part A into Part B or vice versa. You can also have a separate bottle. You can mix it up equal parts. You don't have to mix up the whole bottle. Just make sure it's a 1-to-1 ratio, equal parts. For this demonstration, I'm going to pour all of Part A into Part B. So once I've poured all of the components into Part B, I'm going to shake vigorously for at least 20 to 30 seconds. So if you see the top of the bottle on the PS205 crack filler, you'll see it's got different size tips determining whether you have a small fracture or a large fracture. So this stone right here has a pretty small fracture, so you can cut the very first one off. So once you have this mixed up properly, it's important to go ahead and have all this cleaned out prior to mixing this, because once you mix this up, you only have a certain amount of time where you can get this product into the fracture before this sets up on you. So I went ahead and went over here and vacuumed out. You want to vacuum out all of the fracture, make sure there's no debris that's going to stop the PS205 from penetrating to where it needs to go. You want to fill that crack completely to the top until it's overflowing. So once you've completely filled the crack in the concrete and it's overflowing, just take a regular putty knife, patch trowel, something flat, and all you're wanting to do is just rake off that excess. Like so. Once you've done that, you want to take a little bit of sand while the material's still wet. You just want to sprinkle some sand on top of that PS205 so it can actually dry in it. And once it's dry, we'll vacuum that off, and that'll give you a good rough surface that the moisture mitigation will stick to. When using WAKOL PU 280 or MS330 moisture barrier, it is crucial to have an absorbent substrate. So if you do not have an absorbent substrate, you need to mechanically clean the substrate by using either a shot blaster or a grinder to remove any adhesive residues or sealing compounds or curing compounds off of the slab, so that the moisture mitigation system that you're using is able to penetrate into the capillary structure of the concrete. Such as PU 280, that specific moisture barrier is designed to penetrate. So if you have adhesive residue or anything that can inhibit the PU 280 from being able to penetrate, it must be mechanically removed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ASTM F3191, and that's just a standard test method for testing the porosity of concrete or absorption. So I have a little water droplet. It's a simple test. All you do is put a single droplet of water onto the concrete slab. Within 60 seconds or less, that water droplet right there should fully absorb into the concrete slab. If you still have a puddle, even in part, after 60 seconds, then your concrete slab is non-absorbent, and you must go through the measures to making it absorbent. So today I want to talk a little bit about WAKOL PU 280 moisture barrier. The WAKOL PU 280 moisture barrier comes in a 2.5 gallon jug or a 1 gallon jug. You can get up to 400 square feet per gallon using the LOBA Micro 60/80 roller. So you can get about 1,000 square feet out of a 2.5 one coat, and then you can get 400 square feet out of a 1 gallon. Earlier we spoke about moisture testing in concrete. The WAKOL PU 280 moisture barrier is good for up to 12 pounds on the calcium chloride test, 1 coat, and up to 18 pounds on the calcium chloride, 2 coats. And it's also good for up to 98% RH if you're using the situ probes that we had discussed. So you can also use WAKOL PU 280 as a primer in a single coat application. You can use WAKOL PU 280 as a consolidator and a solidifier. You can use WAKOL PU 280 to solidify gypsum. You can also use the PU 280 to consolidate cutback adhesive residue. Not only is WAKOL PU 280 moisture barrier just a moisture barrier, it can also be used for other things. For instance, if you're wanting to consolidate old cutback adhesive residue, you can use WAKOL PU 280 as a primer, and although it might offer some moisture protection, it is not considered a moisture barrier unless it can penetrate into the capillary structure of the concrete. WAKOL PU 280 can also be used to solidify gypsum underlayments. So you're going to want to shake up the PU 280 really good before you open it. So shake it up really good. I always like to work out of a bucket. You don't have to, but we encourage you to work out of a bucket. It's just a cleaner job. Got a WAKOL bucket here. Put a liner bag in there. That way you can save your bucket. So I've already shaken this PU 280. And you're just going to want to pour some in the bucket. Just be careful none of it splashes back and gets in your eyes. That would not be good. Just like so. Make sure you put the cap back on there when you get done pouring it, because the WAKOL PU 280 is a moisture cured product. So if you leave that cap off, moisture is getting inside there and it's going to start setting up. So when applying the PU 280 moisture barrier, the key is to apply it thin to win. You don't want to put on too much product. You think more is better, but in this scenario, it's really not, because it is a polyurethane product. So polyurethane naturally is going to foam. If you put it on too heavy, it's just going to bubble on you, and it's going to dry hard like that. So if you're doing it as a single coat application, we recommend doing cross-directional to make sure you have no dry spots, mist spots. You just want to make sure you have no puddles. But usually when I'm doing a two-coat system, I'll usually roll one direction on the first coat, and then on the second coat, once it's dry, I'll come back and I'll roll the second coat perpendicular to this direction. I'm really trying to squeeze the product into the concrete slab. So we've opened up the slab, used a shot blaster or grinder. He was able to get the slab clean, dry, and absorbent. So now that you've done that, you're really trying to squeeze it and press all that material into the concrete. That way it can penetrate in there. If you roll it on too heavy, it's just going to look really, see how it's wanting to foam like that? You can see how it's wanting to foam really bad. You don't want that. So you want to take that and pull some of that material back. If you're wanting that 400 square foot per gallon coverage rate, thin to win. More is not better. I suggest always masking off cabinets and the kitchen cabinets with plastic. You don't want to get this PU 280 on cabinets or anything, because there's nothing that'll take it off other than sandpaper. So if you don't want it getting overspray on someone's cabinets, I suggest you masking them off. So we've talked a lot about PU 280 over concrete, but I want to talk a little bit about going over OSB or wood or gypsum. So a lot of people ask, can I use PU 280 as a moisture barrier on those substrates? So the answer is no. You don't ever want to use PU 280 as a moisture barrier. A moisture barrier is called two coats. That calls for two coats. So if you're going over moisture sensitive substrates such as OSB, plywood, or gypsum, Never, ever, ever do 2 coats of PU 280. Always only 1 coat, because you want to use it as a moisture retarder. You don't want to block moisture in plywood. You want to slow the rate of moisture through that plywood, because wood needs a little bit of moisture. When leveling over WAKOL PU 280 moisture barrier, it is important to use the right primer. In this scenario, we're going to use WAKOL D 3045 special primer. It is a dispersion-based primer with grit for enhanced adhesion. So it's important to always use D 3045 special primer exclusively when going over WAKOL PU 280 moisture barrier. So when applying WAKOL D 3045 special primer, I'm using the same roller nap as we use on the PU 280. It's the Micro 6080 roller. You don't want to apply too heavy of an application. If you do that, it's not going to hurt anything, you're just wasting material. So again, you're just wanting to apply a thin coat. As you can see, that's way too heavy. So I'm wanting to take that puddle and just push it out. It goes on pink, but once it's dry, it'll be clear. You'll no longer see the color in there. So the WAKOL D 3045 special primer can be used over PU 280. It can also be used over plywood. You're just wanting a good even coat to coat the whole surface. And once it dries, the whole room will feel like 100 grit sandpaper. And it'll dry clear. So again, not too heavy. As you can see, that right there is about how you're going to want it. So now that we've filled the cracks in the concrete, we've put the PU 280 moisture barrier down, and we've primed the surface, we're now ready for leveling compound. So this particular leveling compound I'm going to talk to you today briefly is the WAKOL Z 631 leveling compound. With this leveling compound, you can pour as minimal of 1/8 of an inch or up to 2 inches thick in one single pour. You're going to need a certain amount of tools to do this job. We actually have these WAKOL mixing containers for sale, and it'll come with the mixing barrel, not the cart, but the mixing barrel, and it'll also come with a gauge rake, and this is just a measuring device. It's got skis on each side here, Phillips head screws. You can set how high you want to pour, whether it be 1/8 of an inch or all the way up to 2 inches, and then you lock down the screws. That's just a measuring device just to place the material. Once you have the material placed, you're going to come back with a smoothing trowel, and it's just a flat trowel, and that's just basically to fine tune what you've put down to break that surface tension and smooth out the product. You're also going to get portioning pails with it. The WAKOL, this is the 5-quart portioning pail, and this is specifically for the Z631 leveling compound. As you can notice, it has the square cutout right here, so that's very important right there, and it keeps you from overwatering your leveling compound, so you can just work out of a big trash can full of water or a bucket, depending on how much leveling compound you're putting down. So when you're mixing up WAKOL leveling compounds, it's crucial to have a good drill with a high RPM. This specific one is like 850 RPM. We require a minimum of 650 RPMs, but you're wanting a good quality drill so you can actually mix up that stuff and break up those polymers. The mixing paddle I'm using right now, as you can see, is kind of shaped like football. The reason that being is because we have this mixing kit and it has the dome shape to it. So if you're not mixing in one of these and you're mixing in like a regular bucket like this, you're not going to want to use this paddle. You're going to want to use something more like this right here so you can get around the perimeter of the bucket. Anytime on a leveling job, I go ahead and have my leveling job staged. Go ahead and have my bags open. Obviously, I only have 2 bags today because I'm not pouring a whole lot. But on a big job, I would go ahead and have them stacked up, leveled up like that, and go ahead and have the tops of them cut out. That way I don't have to fidget around with them. I can go ahead and grab them and put them in there. The more guys you can put on this, the easier your job's gonna go. One thing I do recommend is getting the WAKOL dust collector. If you're mixing inside, then it's crucial to have one of these. You don't want to dust out someone's place of business or someone's house. So first, as I mentioned before, the portioning pails, each bag requires 5 quarts of cold water. Never use hot water, or make sure your powder is never left outside where it can be exposed to sunlight. You want your powder to be cool and your water to be cool also. If your water is hot or your powder is hot or both, then it's just going to cut down your working time drastically. So I've already got a bucket here of water in there. Like I said before, it's got the square cut out. I'm just going to dip, hold it up level. It will pour out when it gets to the bottom there. That way you don't have to sit there with a hose pipe and wait on it to fill up. So I'm mixing 2 bags, so it's going to require 10 quarts of water. Once I get my water in there, I'm going to go ahead and pre-wet the walls so the powder does not stick. So whenever we start mixing, go ahead and start a timer, turn your vacuum on. So we're going to want to mix that for approximately 2 to 3 minutes. Now that we have it properly mixed, we're ready to start pouring floor. Push a little bit out. Go ahead and grab your gauge rake. You want to keep that thing flat. You don't want to angle it. If you angle it, you change how much material you're putting down. As you notice, I got cleats on. That way you can walk in the material. You don't want to walk in this flat-footed. That'll make a mess. So just get you some regular cleats, not metal, but just rubber cleats. Anytime you're mixing up leveling compound, you're going to want to make sure you're always pouring wet material into wet material. So as I'm already spreading this out, I've got 2 other guys mixing up another batch. Because if I let this set up, you're not going to want to try to pour wet material into material that's already starting to set up. It will not merge correctly. So whenever you have the leveling compound placed with the gauge rake, you can do one of two things. Some guys like the spike roller, some guys like the smoothing trowel. Doesn't matter, it's doing the same thing. All you're trying to do is fine tune it, basically break that surface tension. We got it placed, you're gonna walk through the material and you're not wanting to rake material out because you've already got to set your height, but you're just basically wanting to break that surface tension of the leveling compound. Hard to do on a small panel, but you get the point. So now we've successfully filled cracks in concrete. We've put down PU 280 moisture barrier. We've done D3045 special primer. We've leveled. Now we have a perfectly flat, smooth, absorbent substrate to install your wood floor.
Into the question and answer portion of this video. If you have any questions, feel free to ask now. Just type them in the box.
Hey, Eric, Kim here. So have a bunch of questions. The first one is, can the WAKOL Z 631 be used over plywood?
Yeah, so that is a good question. It can be used over plywood. It is approved to go over plywood. You know, I would definitely make sure that the plywood was very secure. Make sure that it's screwed down and everything. Sometimes if they nailed down that plywood with like the slick nails, sometimes I've seen, you know, a leveling compound, it has a little bit of tensile pull, and I've actually seen them back out some of the nails. So make sure the plywood is properly fastened. But yes, it is approved to go over plywood, and you can use that same D3045 special primer. You can use that that primer to go over the plywood, or you can also use our D3004 primer that we did not talk about today, but it can be used. That's our primer concentrate. If you use that primer concentrate full strength, you can use that over plywood as well to prime the surface to receive the leveling compound. Good question, though.
Okay, great. Another question. If I need to pour another layer of your leveler, excuse me, do I have to use a primer in between, or can I pour directly onto the first pour?
Yeah, so there again, yeah, I think I talked about that briefly in the video or in the presentation earlier. So yeah, so that those pictures I showed with the air bubbles, that's what'll happen if you don't prime. So if you're priming, if you have to pour, like say you pour some self leveler and then you realize, oh man, I kind of didn't get that area right there good enough, I need to pour some more on top of it. You can do that, but you're not going to want to use that D3045 special primer. You're going to want to use either the D3003, that is our ready to use primer. It's a water-based primer. It comes in a 2.5 gallon jug, or you need to use the D3004 primer concentrate and mix it at a 1-to-2 ratio, one part primer, 2 parts water. So do that. It's extremely dry, like fast dry time. So once you, if you're going over absorbent, I think it's like 10 to 20 minutes, and you can pour on top of that. So hope that answered the question.
Yeah, those photos you showed earlier were really interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Another one, Eric, how do I get PU 280 off of cabinets and baseboards once it has dried?
Yeah, Don had a good solution to getting that off, and he always says, I took a page out of his book. He always says use a credit card to get it off. And people say, oh really, a credit card will scrape it off? I'm like, no, you get a credit card and you pay for new cabinets. So I say that jokingly, but no, all serious though, if you get PU 280 on cabinets or baseboards, there's really no solution that you can use to get it off once it's dried. I think I said that in the video too. If you get that, it's really important to plastic off the cabinets, because when you're rolling, you're in there working and everything, and you might get a little bit of overspray, and it might get on those nice oak cabinets, or and then once it dries, I mean, there's nothing that'll get off but like sandpaper. So I always be real mindful of that. That PU 280, I mean, once it's on something, it is on it for good. So. Make sure
I like the credit card answer.
Yeah, make sure you get it off when it's wet. I mean, we have our WAKOL cleaning towels. I know we didn't talk about those today, but those are real cool. They're kind of like in a little bucket, kind of like wet wipes. You just pull out one, and it's got, it'll clean off that that PU 280, and it's really good for also cleaning off like silane-based and urethane-based adhesive off your hands and tools. Real gentle on your hands. You can use those, or if you don't have those, obviously mineral spirits and a rag. But you just want to clean it off when it's wet. Don't let that PU 280 dry on someone's cabinets if you do get some on there.
About how much time do you have then, Eric, while it's still wet?
Yeah, probably about 20 minutes, probably. Depending on, like I said, depending on the humidity. If it's real humid in there, it might dry on there really fast. Because it's a moisture cured product.
Okay, good to know. Another PU 280 question, Eric. What CSP is required for applying it? And I guess the first part of that question, for people who are watching who might not know, maybe let them know, what is CSP?
Okay, yes. So that is a really good question. I'm sorry I didn't address that in the video. It's hard to think of everything. But the CSP is basically, it means concrete surface profile. a lot of like epoxy systems, they'll require a concrete surface profile of a 2 or a 3, and it's basically the roughness of the concrete. So we don't actually have a requirement for concrete surface profile. We're just wanting that slab absorbent, you know. And I know I preach that ASTM F3191 until I'm just blue in the face, but I have to preach that because that is the simplest way to find out if your concrete is absorbent enough to receive that moisture mitigation system. So, you know, certain concrete slabs might require a 2 or a 3 to get it absorbent, but it might not. You might just be like a CSP of 1, which is hardly nothing. I mean, it's almost smooth. As long as it's absorbent, that's good enough for us. We do not have a specification or a requirement of it has to be a CSP of 2 or 3.
Okay, good to know. And one more PU 280 question. Okay. Do I have to use WAKOL adhesive over PU 280, or can I use other brands?
Yeah, so that I get that question a whole lot. You know, working in the technical, I have people call and they're like, I want to use so-and-so's adhesive. I like your WAKOL PU 280. I like to use it, but I want to use another manufacturer's adhesive. And you know, I always try to steer people away from that, only because if something did backfire within that system, then who's to blame? You know, I mean, is another manufacturer going to stand behind our product? No, and we're not going to stand behind another manufacturer's product. So if you're going, I like to try to keep people to stay within a system. If you're gonna use our PU 280, use our crack filler. Then use our primer, because we've already tested our primer with that PU 280. We've already tested our adhesives on top of PU 280. So there's not another manufacturer that's going to warranty their adhesive over our moisture mitigation system, and vice versa. I know they do it. People do it all the time, and they get away with it, and that's fine. But you know, it's just it's good to stay within a system, because I have seen some people's adhesive that does not bond to our PU 280. I'm not going to say who those manufacturers are, but it's not that their adhesive is no good. It's just that it does not bond to our product. So that's why I always try to say, you know, stay within a system. If you use our moisture mitigation system, use our adhesive, because if you're gluing down wood, you know, all of our silane-based adhesives, you know, our MS230, 260, or 290, even our sausage adhesives, they're all approved to go over the PU 280. There is an exception. There's I think our K410, you cannot use the K410 over the PU 280 because it requires an absorbent substrate. So, but all of our reactive adhesives, our wood floor adhesives, they are approved to go over the PU 280.
Okay, great. I think every single manufacturer out there basically would beg people to use their system of products.
Right. You know, and like I said, and in theory, it should work. But you know, people say, well, can I use this adhesive over your PU 280? I said, yeah, you can do whatever you want, but I haven't tested it, and I'm not planning on testing it. You know, I have no reason to test it.
Right.
And that other manufacturer that made that glue, they're not going to test it either, because it's not their responsibility to do it. So if you do it, then you're kind of on your own. So
yeah, you just really want to be proactive about
right
using products that you know work together.
Yeah, and you know, I know people do it every day and they get away with it, but you know, I just like to stay within a system, and I'm sure that those other manufacturers, they're going to, you know, stay, you know, tell you to stay within their system. So I always refer to a manufacturer's instructions. I know I talked a lot about ASTM standards, you know, but you know, if you're using, you know, our product or our adhesive or anything, I always refer to our technical data sheets that supersedes ASTM. So I always refer to manufacturer's instructions on any product you're using.
Absolutely. So I think that's all the time we have for today. Just to remind everyone who's watching, you will be getting an email with a recording of this video. And if you have any more questions that weren't answered today, you, of course, can email us at Woodfloor Business. You can email LOBA Wakol, your rep. Make sure we get those answered for you. So Eric, thank you so much for sharing all your expertise and your experience with everyone.
Hey, Kim, thanks for having me.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
You too.